Hello, welcome back to the workshop and the old Yamaha XT600 motorbike. All I've done since I last filmed anything on this bike is give it a wash and I've charged the battery. Now I'm going to give it a pre-MoT check, a very thorough pre-MoT check. Every country just about has some kind of roadworthiness test, an annual inspection of some sort, and it's going to be similar to this, but also, and this is the main thrust of what I'm trying to get across in this video, is that the MoT and whatever test you have in whatever country you live in is a minimum standard. And rather than the mindset which I always had as a youngster of getting a vehicle up together, scrape it through the MoT and then don't have to worry about it for a year, if you think of it as the minimum requirement of roadworthiness, then every time you go riding it should be above the MoT standard. God, I sound like a right grown-up. I'm going to go over the whole MoT process, and I'm going to do that by reference to the actual MoT manual, which is freely available online. And then once I've done that, I'm going to go through the actual MoT checklist, which again is freely available, and I've downloaded a copy here. My aim is to demystify the process a bit, because always when you say you're taking a bike or a car or whatever vehicle for an MoT test, people say good luck, and there's always quite a lot of unknown to it. But it doesn't have to be, because like I say, these regulations and documents and the instructions to the testers are it's all freely available information now. I brought my little laptop over and I've opened up these tabs at the top here. Each tab is a chapter of the MoT handbook. I'm not going to go through the whole thing verbatim because that would take hours and hours. What I'm going to try and do is boil it down. So just go over some of the pertinent points, and if you need any more detail you can always look it up. I'm going to put links to the MoT handbook and the checklist and everything else that I found in the description of this video. I'm showing you this just as an example of how it's laid out. So you can see here, these are the categories that will appear when you get a failure, for instance. This is where they tick it, and this is what comes out on the printout. Going a little further down, you've got instructions for an entire procedure for testing each component of the bike. First up then, we're going to look at the front brakes, or front brake in my case, because it's just a single disc here with a single piston caliper on it. It's dead simple. What we're going to check is the level of fluid in the reservoir. They're not allowed to open it up and look at it, but on my one here it has a sight glass on the front, and you can just about see that it's at a reasonable level there. And then the pipe that comes down, so this hose here that comes from the reservoir all the way down to the caliper. I'm going to check it for any damage, and then what they should do is pull in the brake, so hold it on tight, pressurising the system, and then check again, see if there's any visible leaks. Assuming we're okay with that, then I'm going to go and check the brake pads. Now, in the vehicle manual there'll be a specification for the minimum thickness of the brake pads, but in practice it's pretty obvious when they're at their minimum. It's pretty obvious, but it's going to be a bugger to film. Right, I'm going to try and get in there with it. There you go. So from this angle we can see both of the pads, and you can see because this bike only has one piston, one pad is worn down a lot more than the other. But there's plenty there, so that's fine. While we're down here, we'll have a look at the disc. So what I'm doing here is feeling for any big grooves, any real damage that's appeared in there. For instance, if I'd run the brake pads down to the metal, there'd be gouges out of this. And I'm also checking the ridge at the end here. One thing that I found interesting about the brake disc, I looked it up because I assumed there's going to be a minimum thickness that the manufacturer specifies before it needs replacing. Now for this particular bike and this particular model year, there isn't, strange enough. In my manual, it's just got a blank and an asterisk and says information not provided by Yamaha. So there you go. But more pertinent to the rest of you that don't own XT600s from the mid-80s, when I'm looking in the MoT manual, it says a brake disc must be significantly worn before ejection is justified. Being worn below manufacturer's recommended limit is not a reason in itself. So that's an interesting point. What that means then is that the tester, the MoT tester, is never going to measure the thickness of your disc, which makes sense because they don't know for your particular bike. What they're looking for is significant damage, or if it looks warped or grooved or any of those things. And they're going to look to see if there's a reasonable amount of meat left on it, which on this one there is. So we'll carry on. Back brake next. Now on my bike, it's just a drum. So there's no, if there was a disc, we'd be doing exactly the same as with the front there. Being as it's a drum, there's very little you can check without dismantling it. And the MoT inspector's not going to dismantle it. They're not going to dismantle anything. All we can check then is that it functions. So look at all this, make sure the linkage works. Now, on my one here, it's got a wear indicator, but that doesn't really tell you anything anyway. And that's it for the brakes. Of course, during the actual test, they'll put it on a rolling road and check the braking efficiency, and can't really do that here. But you should know if your brakes are good or not. And if they're not, you should fix them until they are good. But if your brakes work properly out in the real world, they're going to work fine for the test. Moving on then. Next up is steering, and this is dead simple. And it says in the manual there, to inspect a motorcycle steering operation with the wheel supporting the weight of the motorcycle, which it is. I'm sat on it, so the stand's off the ground, all the weight's on the wheels, and then it says turn the steering lock to lock. So we go lock to lock. I'm going to do this is just feeling for any play in it, or any tightness either. And that feels fine to me. Rock the handlebars. And what they're looking for here is any movement. Now there is rubber mounting attaching the handlebar to the yoke there, so there will be some movement. So don't panic if you can rock it a bit. But they're checking for looseness, for excess play, and it will be obvious if that's there. Next thing on the list are the bearings here and here. Now this bottom bearing, it says to check by doing that with the wheel on the ground and seeing if there's any discernible play in there, which there isn't. To check the top bearing, we need to get the front wheel up. So to get the front wheel off the ground, on most bikes with a centre stand would be quite easy. I see this bike's only got a side stand, so it's a bit more of a faff. What I normally do is pick it up from the hoist that I've got in the middle of the workshop. But I thought I'd try jacking it and see what happens. I put a block of wood. You can just about see there's a block of wood under the side stand, and then I'm lifting it pretty much in the middle with a rather oversized jack. Now the front wheel is off the ground, and that's reasonably sturdy. I did consider getting one of those motorbike jacks, which is like a little scissor lift table, about that big, and they're really cheap. Possibly too cheap. Yeah, by which I mean of dubious quality. But then I thought, how often do I need to lift a bike? And I've got a workshop that's rammed full of stuff anyway, so yeah, I thought I'd make do with this jack, which fairness, seems to be doing the job quite well. So we're looking at going lock to lock again. So this lamp does contact with the tank at full lock, but it does make full lock, so we're okay. And yeah, there's no play in there, and there's no tightness either. Now the last part of the steering section just talks about wheel alignment. I'm pretty sure my wheels are nicely aligned, although to be honest I've never checked it. I'll save that for another day. There we go. This would be easier to lift and lower if I did it on this side where I've got the actual side stand. I would feel a little bit more under control, but there's just not enough room there. Anyway, we're getting it done. Next up is the lighting. Now this is something that they are pretty hot on with the MoT, but possibly not in the way that you might expect. First thing I look at then is the headlight. Now interestingly, until I did the research for this video, I didn't realise that there'd been fairly recent changes to the MoT legislation outlawing HID conversions. So the high intensity discharge lamp that I had in here before the LED technically is now outlawed. In practice though, the MoT man is not going to look inside the light, and he's not going to look inside here to see how it's wired up and what's going on or anything. What he's going to look at is the beam pattern. So according to the tester's handbook there's a wide range of allowance for the headlight actually. It can be white, yellow, or mainly white with a blue tinge. All that's fine. The light source, as it refers to the headlight here, or what's powering the headlight, can be any bulb, LED, or other means of emitting light. Well, that's quite broad. So it was only in a 2018 update that they mentioned specifically that the HID conversion kits are not allowed. If your bike comes with a HID kit, obviously that's fine. Just because I know some people would be interested, and I have been asked a few times, I'm going to very briefly go over the differences between the halogen bulb, the HID conversion kit that I fitted, and the LED that's in there at the moment. I say very briefly because there is a much better video out there that you can watch by the channel Fault9. It's really good. All the different types of lighting and their pros and cons. So I'm only going to cover it briefly here. Now this of course is the, well, it's not the one that came out there, but it's an example of a halogen bulb, a H4 halogen bulb. And what I'm pointing out here, what I'm trying to get across here, is that you've got two filaments in here, but they're quite carefully shaped to aim the light out in a specific direction. The trouble can come when you put in an LED bulb that's not shaped to focus the light in any particular direction, and that's when you just get the sort of the flood effect coming out of it. So this conversion kit was reasonably effective, and like I said in the previous video, the reason I fitted this was because it's much brighter than the halogen, but actually drew less power from the limited amount of power that's available on the bike. You can see here they've gone to some effort when they've been building the shroud of this to actually make it effective. On these lights, rather than having two filaments like you would on a halogen to switch between them, it actually physically moves that light up and down. One big drawback with this is there's actually loads of kit you've got to try and ram in there. But like I said before, the main and the deal breaker for me, the main drawback, was that it was very intolerant of high or low voltage, so it would only work on a very narrow band of voltage, but above or below that would just cut out, which for a headlight, to me, that's unacceptable behaviour. The light that's in there at the moment is one of these. I had to buy a pair because they're obviously for cars. So in the box, you get the unit itself, which has got a teeny weeny fan at the back, and then this is the power supply for it, which again you've got to fit this inside the cowling, but it's obviously much less bulky than the power unit for the other one. And that's the exact bulb that I had. Now, I'm not necessarily recommending it, this is just what I found. Your application may be different, and I'd encourage people to do their own research. What I'll do then, because it's pretty much midday at the moment and it's even sunny outside, I can't really show you the beam pattern of this. I'll wait until it's dark, I'll do those tests then. Now if anybody wants to look in detail at the regulations, it mentions here 2 different types of headlight and 2 different methods of testing them. This is a European style lamp, and then further down British American pattern style lamp. So there's an awful lot of detail if you really want to know the ins and outs of it. While we're here then, we can check some of the other lights up the front here. So I've got the ignition on, and I can put the indicator on. It's just common sense really, it's got to be a steady flashing, not a flickery or a rapid flash or anything like that. We all know what an indicator is supposed to look like. Checking the rear lights then, let's put the lights on. Anyway, so that should be lit. I suspect it's a loose connection under here, so I'll come back to that. Now they do make a particular point in the handbook about the brake light has to come on with both brake controls. So I've got the back brake pedal down here, which turns it on, and that one there. Before we move on, a few people have commented, and you may have noticed yourself, there's no mirrors on my bike. There's no legal requirement to have mirrors. There is no mention of mirrors at all in that MOT handbook. It's quite sensible to have mirrors, although most motorbike mirrors are, in my experience, are fairly useless anyway. Personally, I don't bother with them. I just look around me if I need to, and that works for me. That's all the lighting checked then, and on this bike it was just that tail light isn't working at all, so I'm going to have to fiddle with that. Everything else is up together. Next up, I'm going to check the wheels and tyres. So we're now up to chapter 5 on the handbook. I have got one of these paddock stands. It's actually so for servicing I normally use this, which hooks under the swing arm at the back there, and then you push it down like that and it pops the back wheel up in the air. Quite handy for the back wheel, but obviously no use for the front. And what I'm checking here is the tyre and the wheel bearings. So there's a bit of drag in it, but I'm putting that down to lack of use. Yeah, it's dragging on the brake, not on the bearing itself. So there's no roughness in the bearing is what I'm trying to feel for. And equally, there's no slop in the bearing. So if I grab the wheel in line with the forks here, I can't move it this way against that, if you see what I mean. Onto the tyre then, and got to check for cracking first. So the first set of tyres that I fitted to this bike after rebuilding it actually cracked in the side before they'd worn down in the middle, which was a bit disappointing. That was even tyres. These ones here, Michelin's, have done much better. Now if we have a good look at the tread, this is low on this tyre. The legal minimum for a motorbike is 1 mil, and I'll check it with these verniers. So we're currently at 3 mil on there, which is absolutely fine. That's the front then. Let's check the back, see how it moves, I suppose. So that's moving nicely. So I grip it top and bottom again, and there's no play in the bearing there, that's good. While I'm here, I'm going to check the swing arm bearing. Now this should be good because I only replaced it last year. So I grip the frame with one hand and the swing arm with the other. And there's nothing going on there, as I'd expect, so that's good. Now this back tyre is quite worn, but still, even in the middle there, we're getting yeah, it's nearly 3 mils still. This tyre is low, particularly in the middle, because I don't corner very well anymore. But it's within spec, as it were. It's perfectly legal. Now I have actually got a brand new tyre ready to fit when the time comes, and you can see the difference is quite obvious there between the two. But this has still got a bit of life in it, so I'm going to carry on using it until it is, well, a bit more worn out. I'm here with the bike jacked up. I should check the spokes. So you can check the spokes by hitting them with something. And although I can't really tell if that's tight enough, I will be able to, even with my musical ability, I'll be able to tell if there's a duff one, because it'll make a completely different sound to the others. They're all similar enough to pass. Now the back wheel I relaced quite recently, so this should be fine. And the back wheel is, well, it's stainless steel spokes and obviously a smaller wheel, so we're going to have a different note. They all sound the same is the key thing, I think, for that. Part of the test is to check whether the tyres are suitable for the bike. But really you should know that. You should know if you've got road tyres or off-road tyres. You should know if they're the right size. So in the manual for my bike, for instance, it says what tyres are suitable for going on these wheels. That should all be, you know, really obvious well before you get to the MoT. Next thing to check then in the region of the wheels is the suspension. Now your MoT tester is allowed to move the rubber gaiters if they so desire, to check if there's any leakage here. Now my particular bike, I did the fork seals 2 years ago, so they should be alright. So check those on both sides, and then the back shock as well, and that needs to be checked to make sure there's no play in it on its mountings, it's not moving around, no obvious leaks, anything like that. It's all common sense stuff really. The most obvious test for the suspension then is simply to sit on the bike and see what happens. If it just goes chumph and stays there, obviously that's not so good. And then we've got the bump test on the front, so pull on the front brake as hard as possible and then see what happens. This is also another way of testing the bearing in the head here, see if there's any play in there, if that moves at all, which it doesn't on this one. See, on this bike I think the front springs are tired, personally, but it's never come up even as an advisory. Looking at the handbook then, we're now up to chapter 6 out of 7, and this is structure. Now I'm not going to go around the bike with you looking at the frame and everything, because I know on this bike it is nice and solid. There's some cosmetic rusting, but there's nothing of concern at all. But if you have any concern, check it out, and particularly if you've got a frame with large box section on it or something like that, I'd say that's probably more likely to trap corrosion. If you've got massive fairing and things like that, you might want to have a good look at it. But again, for the MOT, they won't be removing that fairing to have a look. But, you know, for your own peace of mind, I'd say it's a good idea. Like I say, this one I know is structurally sound, which is nice. So I won't go over that too much. Exhaust system. Now we've got to check for leaks on that. So this is one of the few bits of the bike that they check with the engine running. So we better get it running first. Back up to the door then and start it up. I'm going to take the side panel off, although this isn't something that the MOT inspector will do. But I know here I've got to replace this exhaust bandage. The exhaust bandage is here because this is an aftermarket exhaust, and it sticks out slightly more this way than the original one, and that meant it was tended to heat up this panel a bit too much, even though this has got a bit of protection on it. Yes, I'm going to have to tidy that up. While I'm here though, I'll see if it leaks. This silencer's got a habit of opening up a bit where these rivets are, so I may redo that as well. Anyway, let's try and fire it up. I'm going to have to do a bit of work on that. Continuing through the chapter on structure, it talks about the chain. So the chain's got to be in good condition. If you've got a chain connector, like one of those little horseshoe shaped things, that has to be pointing in the right direction, so the closed part of it this way. Things like that, the sprockets need to be in decent nick, all that kind of stuff. Other parts of the chapter on structure talk about the engine mountings need to be secure, the fuel tank needs to be secure, the seat needs to be secure, foot pegs, if they're fitted, need to be secure. So the structure chapter does contain lots more detail about things like that. And on to the last chapter then, chapter 7, audible warning. An audible warning must be loud enough to be heard by other road users. It must not be a gong, a bell, a siren, or more than one tone. Motorcycles first used on or after 1st of August 1973 must emit a continuous or uniform sound that is not harsh or grating. If you have a motorcycle that's first used before 1st of August 1973, it can have a bulb horn. But why, I don't know, because no one's going to hear it. Unless it's huge, I suppose. And the horn that came with the bike didn't work. This, as I said before, is the horn from my Land Rover. I'd say that's fits all the criteria there. That then was a fairly detailed, but hopefully not excessively so, rundown of the MOT handbook, chapter by chapter, throughout the whole of the bike. And hopefully we've brought up something there to think about. And that's all I'm trying to do. I'm not trying to be comprehensively instructive here because there's a handbook for that. But equally I don't just want to blitz through it either. What I'm going to do now is fix those two issues, so the tail light and the exhaust. Then I will actually go through this checklist, and if I'm confident of that, I'll book it for an MOT. When I put this on, I didn't have the proper clips, and I think, yeah, I got a vague memory of trying to wire it on, and that didn't work out very well either. But I do have the proper clips now, and I have some fresh exhaust bandage, so this is all easy enough. Yeah, so I made this little bracket to go onto the subframe here, and that's held in by a couple of M8s. There you go. Main lights are on. So we're going to just make it flicker. No. Oh, there you go. Check it still works. Yes. Cool. There we go. As you might be able to see, it's twilight outside. It might now be dark enough for me to show you the headlight beam cutoff that I was on about. I'll try that. I'm going to turn off the side lights, so this auxiliary lamp there. So we're just on the main headlight now, and that's low beam and there's high beam. So what they're looking for is on low beam like this, there's that cut off. So obviously now I'm off the bike, it's at a slant, but this line here is the crucial one, and that's what stops the low beam dazzling oncoming traffic. So some LEDs can have an appearance more like, if I turn off the main lights, more like that. So this is now just the auxiliary light. You can imagine that without any kind of cut off on it. So even if I put my finger across half of that light, there's no sharp cut off. So there is a lot of discussion out there about LED headlights, but to my mind, that's a better and safer solution than the original halogen. It's brighter, it's just as clean a dip, it uses less power, and so far I've been very reliable. The legality of LED lighting is up for debate, and as far as I can tell, it's more a case that the legislation hasn't been passed yet rather than it's not allowed, if you see what I mean. So when you buy the LED kits, you'll notice it does come with this, which I'd say is more of a disclaimer than a warning. Like I say, my take on it is that the MoT person and potentially a police officer or whatever is much more interested in whether or not you're dazzling oncoming traffic than what's actually inside the headlamp. Okay, well, if there's anybody still watching, well done. We've been through a lot so far. So I've been through the whole MoT manual in a kind of abridged fashion. I've fixed a couple of things that I found as issues on this bike. Next up, I'm going to go through the actual MoT test in effect by going down this checklist. So as I say, I'll put a link to this in the description, and this is what your MoT tester uses. As I say all along, I'm just trying to demystify the process a bit, make it a bit less intimidating to go and have the annual test. On this list we've got it in sections, and this is kind of the suggested routine for the tester. So the top of it there, sitting on machine. Okay, so I'm sitting on the machine. Handlebars, brake controls and switches. So we've done the handlebars, very nice and secure. I've just done up that brace. Switches, we know are good because I did that switch gear a little while ago. Everything else is sweet. I'm going to give that a pass. Throttle and clutch lever. Head bearings and horn. So the head bearings again, so front brake on, do a bump test there, and I'm trying to see if there's any movement between the yoke here and the frame. No, I can't see any at all. Horn, yep. So that's a tick. Front suspension bump test, so that's that one again. And like I say, on this bike I reckon that could be springier, but I think that's how it's always been, so I'm going to give that a pass. And rear suspension. So that bounces back up reasonably enough. And the steering. That feels fine. Next then, front of machine. We're looking at front position lamps, headlamps and indicators. So we've just tested all that. Steering damper, I don't have one of those, so that's easy enough. Brake master cylinder. So when it says brake master cylinder, it's checking for leaks and for fluid level. So both of those are fine. Front mud guard. So on my one, there's a bracket on each side and 4 bolts in total holding it on. They're all present and correct and doing their job. So, going well so far. Next up then, front wheel raised. Steering again, which is fine. head bearings, and suspension, and we're checking for leaks. So yeah, we'll give that a tick. Wheels and bearings, so we've been over that. There's a bit of binding, but I reckon by the time we get to the MOT centre that binding will have worn itself off. Tyre and front brake is good. Offside of machine, which is this side. Frame, seat and footrests. So the frame, as we said, it's just got to be up together really, and no corrosion, nothing like that. Anything wrong with a frame should really jump out at you, it really should. The foot pegs, they need to be non-slip is what it says. So these, this is a dirt bike or dirt bike origins. It's got these saw teeth around here, so yeah, that's fine there. And on this bike we've got pillion footrests as well, present and correct. Exhaust, fuel system, tyre and brake. So we've been through all of that just now. So the exhaust I've just fixed, I'm going to say is fine. The brake, all I can tell at the moment from the brake is that the linkage is fine, and you should be able to see there the reflection of the brake light coming on. And like I say, that brake light has to work from this control and this control, which it does. Rear of machine. Rear position lamp. So that's the tail light. Put the lights on. Yep, tail light is still working. So you're going to see a reflection on that. Stop lamp, we've just done that. Indicators. And the tail light there obviously lights up the number plate as well. Next up then, and you can see we're pretty much halfway, well over halfway there already, near side of machine. So that's this side. Let's turn the lights off. So near side of machine, again frame, seat and footrests on this side. So the frame is good, seats still secure on this side. Foot pegs, the same on this side. Okay, next, rear wheel raised. Now we're looking at rear wheel and bearings, so that's checking the spokes if you've got spokes, checking the tyre for cracking, depth of tread and inflation, checking that it moves properly, no rust spots in the bearings, and checking there's no play in either the swing arm or the wheel bearings themselves. Now we've got wheel alignment. So I'm not going to check the wheel alignment. I've got a feeling that it would be very obvious if your wheel alignment was out. It'd be, I suspect the bike would be very unstable, but I don't know that. Now I could check it with a laser level. I do somewhere have a laser level that draws a line, and that would be the easiest way to check it I can think of, is to set it up so it does a straight line across the back wheel and then points at the front. But the thing is, you can't have anything in the middle holding the bike up, so really you need a person supporting it so that it's nice and upright when you're measuring that. And since I'm in here all on my own, that's not going to happen. So we'll put an NA on that. Brake test, again I can't check that properly because I don't have a rolling road, but I know that they're not binding, grabbing or juddering, so I'm going to give that a tick. The efficiency, yeah, I'm going to give it NA. Headlamp aim, now we checked that outside and I think the cutoff is just right. You can adjust the aim of the headlight during the MOT, so I think it's pretty much the only thing that you're allowed to do during the test. so you can adjust the height of that cut-off, but if the cut-off's not there at all, if you've got the wrong type of LED bulb for instance, then you're out of luck. So I'm going to give it a tick on mine. And then the last section on here is sidecar, so I'm going to give that an NA as well. And that's that. So then, with all that done, I can now be reasonably confident of taking it to an MoT test and at least not completely embarrassing myself. So I'm going to book it in and we'll take it from there. I had to get up really early and now I'm about to go riding in the rain. That's two things I really don't like. Oh, that was unpleasant. Rather damp. But I have a pass. I got one advisory, which was the front tyre, which, as I pointed out, is near the legal limit, which is exactly what it says on the advisory. So I'm happy with that. So hopefully that's helped some of you out there to demystify the process a bit of the MoT and what they're actually looking for, and to demonstrate with a bit of preparation there's no reason it shouldn't just sail through. It's not a particularly involved test for the motorbike. I mean, there's not really that much to it. Anyway, I'm going to go and sit by the fire. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Cheers.